Our dad, Nels90, is turning 90. That in and of itself is a pretty big accomplishment. But as my brother Bill and I look over the last 60 plus years that we've had him enriching our lives, we realize that his story is much more grand than him being 90 or his being our father. It is a story of many chapters, not the least of which is the meaningful relationship that he has had and continues to have with his 3 sisters. Their father was Nels, a lanky, handsome, hard-working Swede who loved to read any book or newspaper he could get his hands on. He was truly a self-educated man. Grace, their mother, of Irish descent, was petite in size with a huge heart, especially for her children and grandchildren. And what magic she did in the kitchen. We all knew them as Mom and Pop. Dad, the eldest, Joy and Joyce, the twins, and Wilma, who was also known as Baby in her younger years, were born in Carrington, North Dakota, about 90 miles west of Fargo. Carrington is a place with hot summers and brutal winters. It is often said that the only thing between Carrington and the North Pole is a screen door, and it is open most of the time. This is a picture of the 4 kids, and Mom probably made each of these dresses with her foot-pedal sewing machine.
The old saying back in those days in North Dakota, and even when we came to Washington, was Saturday night is bath night. And bath night at our house wasn't like bath night today. We had a little tub like the one you see in the picture here, set up in the middle of the kitchen, and Mom would fill it about half full of hot water, and the girls would all get to bathe first, and I bathed last, of course. And though the water was a little murky, I didn't mind that. It was the water was beginning to get pretty cold by the time I got in. Just as the buggies and the wagons of that era had wooden spokes, even the little playthings like this little wagon had wooden spokes also. And it was many years before the disc wheel came out and put all these hundreds of spoke makers out of business, I suppose.
Here they are traveling on their horse, Pony. But Dad's favorite mode of transportation was the automobile. He had and continues to have a passion for cars. Here's a picture of Dad way before his feet could reach the pedals. This car is a 1925 model. It has wooden wheels and no roll-up windows. Dad and the girls are in their Sunday best. I think that Pop also liked cars. Here is Pop's 1927 Overland, the very first car in the neighborhood to have roll-up windows.
Here's our 1929 Model A Ford that Pop bought probably in June or July of that year, right off the dealer's floor for $640. It had roll-up windows too, of course. And in addition, it had an accessory. It had a trunk attached to the back. So apparently when Pop bought it, we were already thinking and planning ahead for their trip to Wisconsin, or to the West Coast, but stopping in Wisconsin along the way. So 4 of us little kids, we weren't so little then. I mean, I was 11. And so Joy and Joyce would have been 10, and Wilma would have been, she'd already had her birthday in August, so she'd been 9 years old. All squeezed into that little back seat. And I think as we rode along the road, I got the blame for taking up most of the room, but everybody else was just as crowded as I was, I think. But one of those cases where I was outnumbered again, so I was guilty. But at any rate, we did go on from North Dakota, and the first stop was in Wisconsin. Now, Mom's sister, Ruth, lived in Bay City, Wisconsin, so we probably stayed overnight somewhere on the way, but we stopped in Bay City in the middle of winter. As you can see from this picture, everybody's pretty bundled up like It isn't summer anymore. And in the picture you can see is on the, Marion is on the left, and Lloyd's beside her. Marion's now 94, and Lloyd is 85, I think it is. They live in the same retirement community up in Minnesota now, and they attended our reunion last summer in Minneapolis. And then going on across, of course, there's Pop, or first of all, Ruth and Walter, and then Pop and Mom, and there's Joyce, and I think I'm next, and then Joy and Wilma in the picture. And we're all bundled up, as you can see, for probably it was good old Wyoming weather that we were having there in Wisconsin on that day. Pop had heard that in Wisconsin they needed horses to work the farms. So during the summer and fall, he'd been buying horses. I imagine that all the money he had that he get his hands on was tied up in horses. On October the 29th was that famous day that was launched the beginning of the Great Depression, when the stock market took a most abrupt drop, and the banks were closing. So when all that was going on, he had all his money tied up in horses, and in Wisconsin he sold them. So of course a person couldn't have planned better for a depression than that. So at any rate, and then he did sell the horses in Wisconsin, and about the 1st of April we all bundled up in that little Model A and we headed west. Well, that's one thing about the roads. The main highway, east to west across the United States, was gravel most of the way. Some places it was just dirt. And as we entered Kemmer, Wyoming, it was one of those places where it was dirt. And it had thawed already, and we got stuck. I mean, the ruts were horrible. But we did I think us kids got out and pushed some to get through into town of Kemmer. And it froze during the night, as it probably does every April in Kemmer. So the next morning we drove out of town on top of the frozen ground. It was rough, and I'm sure we high-centered many times, but at least we got out of town and on our way to the West Coast.
They arrived in Washington State, and Mom and Pop purchased a farm on Newaukum Hill in April of 1930. This photo was taken at their new home. Pop was 41, and Mom was 37.
There was no inside plumbing in that house either. In fact, the well is out of sight in this picture, just a little ways. But it was an open well with an old oaken bucket, and with a rope on it, of course. On one end of the rope was attached to the bucket, and the upper end was attached to the windlass that you turned to crank the wheel and bring the bucket up out of the water. And of course, it was like all open wells. It was open, and stuff that flew over or blew in, whatever it was, did. And we lived through it all, of course, whatever it was. And it wasn't because it wasn't available for more modern systems, but at least the previous owners hadn't been able to afford to put one in. So no inside plumbing, no faucets, no bathrooms or anything like that. In fact, we had a good old famous two-holer out in back of the house, walking distance away, of course, and the kind they showed pictures of being turned over on Halloween night. So that was how modern the house was when we bought it, and when we moved in, I mean, when Mom and Pop bought it.
After they bought the home, the two main purchases made by Mom and Pop were a team of horses and a drill to begin planting spring crops. A few months later, Pop installed a pump to the well. This is Mom pumping her first bucket of water from this new high-tech device. Inside plumbing came 10 or 12 years later. The Hansen farm had milk cows, chickens, strawberries, and pastures of hayfields. The kids went to school, to church, and worked on the farm. They all had chores both before and after school.
We lived about a quarter of a mile from this Newaukum Hill School, and it was a two-room schoolhouse with the first 4 grades in one room, and there's 7th, 8th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in the other room. And this is a picture of Mary Kreitzer, who was a teacher in the lower room, and there's Wilma standing right in front of her, just to her left, who was in the 4th grade at the time. Joyce was in the 5th grade. No, Joy was in the 5th grade, Joyce was in the 6th grade, and I was in the 7th grade in the other room. So we didn't get in on this picture, neither did our teacher, of course. And I think there's less than 20 kids in those 4 grades, so there's about 5 kids, 4 or 5 kids per grade. So they had low teacher-pupil ratios in those days, but they had a lot of grades. I was, for some completely unknown reason, kept after school for something. And Mary Kreitz, and just one teacher took care of all those that had to stay after school. And that was Mary Kreitzer's day to attend to those who were required to stay. Asked to stay, I mean. And I was one of those asked to stay. And when she turned her back to do something away from me, I slipped out the door and headed down this road to run home, which was only about a quarter mile away. And I didn't get very far down that road till I saw she was following me, carrying a switch in her hand. And I could run a little faster than she could, and she followed me. I thought she'd get tired and turn around and go back, but she didn't. And we were approaching the house, our house, probably a couple hundred yards away, and I decided I would rather get caught by her than to run in the house and have her follow in after me.
The household emphasized hard work, stringent academic performance. The philosophy was to take your work very seriously, but not to take yourself very seriously. They enjoyed a lot of humor in their everyday activities. Dad describes it this way in the Laughlin Reunion Cousins publication.
I was the only boy growing up in a family with 3 hyperactive and intelligent sisters, Joyce, Joy, and Wilma. In retrospect, this was great preparation for the life and career in today's culture. It was made especially so with a heavy dose of the work ethic implanted by our parents. So as a result, the boy grew up into manhood with a few deeply embedded convictions. First, that women were far more than equal than men. And secondly, that being outnumbered is a normal state of affairs. And faced with these realities, the best way for a young man to be prepared is to keep their nose close to the grindstone.
Dad graduated from high school in 1936. That same year, he went off to Pullman to attend Washington State University, then Washington State College. This photo was taken during his junior year. Joyce had just completed 2 years at Eastern College in Ellensburg, majoring in education. Joy had completed her first year in nurses training at St. Joseph's in Vancouver, and Wilma had just graduated from Napavine High School.
Well, as Carol mentioned, of course, I started in 1936. In 1937, my sophomore year, when I was about 19 years old, well, I guess I was 18 years old at the start of my sophomore year, I'd been working in the pea harvest and in the wheat harvest, and I was milking cows at 3 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock in the morning. So I did have enough money to buy a car. And my first car was a 1930 Plymouth. I was 7 years old. And that's it, roll-up windows, of course, and all, even the trunk on the back and all that, for $110. And not many kids in college those days had cars. So at Christmas time, when I'd get ready to drive home for Christmas vacation, my friends who lived in Chehalis would pay me $5 a piece, 5 of them, and they got to ride also and put their bags in the trunk, of course. And at the end of Christmas vacation, it was $25. I paid for all the gas. If I needed a tire, I had enough money to buy a tire, and a few oil changes if necessary. So at any rate, the old clunk, as my sisters called it, was a pretty serviceable car, and that was my automobile until I got a job after I graduated.
After graduation from college in 1940, Dad moved to Randall, where he began his teaching career. The high school was small, 98 students and 4 teachers. In those days, teachers never gave a thought to how many preparations they had each day. That first year, Dad taught animal husbandry, farm crops, chemistry, physics, and general sciences. At the beginning of the second year, he noticed a very cute, petite, first-grade teacher named Phyllis Livingston. She was single. She had to be, as it was illegal for a married woman to teach at that time. But more about Miss Livingston later. 1941. World War II was on the horizon. Joy, who had just completed her nurse's training, became a Navy nurse. She served in Bremerton, Washington, and San Diego, California. Joyce, who had married Harold during the war, continued her teaching, while Harold, also a teacher, joined the Army Air Corps. He flew B-17s and later B-29s in the South Pacific, particularly Tinian. Tinian is an island about 1,500 miles from Japan, and it was one of the closest air bases for aerial attack. Wilma married Chuck. Chuck joined the Navy and served on the USS Widgeon, a naval submarine. Chuck was stationed in the Pacific for almost 3.5 years. Wilma stayed at home with Mom and Pop, helping with the farm, and worked as a bookkeeper for Thompson Feed. 4 years after Chuck died in 1994, Wilma married Charlie. Charlie had also joined the Army Air Corps and flew over 170 missions in the Berlin airlift. Charlie continued to serve in the Army for another 20 years after the war. Dad was scheduled for induction on July 9, 1942, as an Army ground soldier. On May 30th of 1942, the day school was out, it was legal for Miss Livingston to marry. He and our mom, that cute little first-grade teacher, tied the knot. On July 9, Dad was off to the Army, and Mom was home alone. There were occasional furloughs when they could get together. They were bittersweet moments, with the knowledge of long periods apart, which would be fraught with danger and the unknown.
Well, our battalion of big mortars, or large mortars, or heavy mortars as they were called, had been, of course, deployed in Europe earlier, and we were in on the fight to close things down in Europe, and of course it finally ended, and May 5th was what is known as VE Day. And many of the units were pulled back to staging areas, and some were staging areas from which they left to go back to the United States, maybe then on over to the Pacific Theater, to the island of Okinawa for the invasion of Japan. Mortars, however, were so urgent they needed that we weren't being deployed through Japan, but we were kept in a staging area where we were going through training for what we would have to do in Okinawa and for preparation for the invasion of Japan itself. And we would go directly from Europe over to Okinawa if we did that. Get our new equipment, new jeeps, new old mortars, new radios, new all that stuff. And we were about ready to depart when on August the 4th, I received a telegram that Billy was born, or Bill was born. And so here I was, a father. Then on August the 6th, it was reported that the first big bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. And we didn't know what kind of a bomb it was. I don't think it was called an atomic bomb at that time, but we knew it was far more powerful than a high explosive bomb. And anyway, it had been dropped and even done a lot of damage, but we didn't have any idea of the extent of the damage. Then on August the 6th, on August the 9th, the second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. And again, it was just reported as a big bomb and not much detail. But at any rate, on August the 14th, Japan surrendered. So in that 10-day period of time, from August 4th, when I received the telegram, till August the 14th, when we heard that Japan surrendered, about the most best news a person could possibly get. Instead of going to Okinawa, we'd be going home soon. So 10 pretty eventful days, and they changed the course of my life by a long ways.
Here is a photo of Dad in Europe, just after he had heard all the news he just talked about. Now he could think about returning home instead of having to invade the Japanese mainland. After the war, there was a period of settling down, a need to find some security after years of insecurity and uprooting. Joy moved to Monroe, Louisiana, and had 3 children, George, Deborah, and Jan. Joyce and Harold moved to Yakima and had 3 children, Gary, Alan, and Elaine. Wilma and Chuck settled in Chehalis and had 4 children, Steve, Sue, Jeff, and Jenny. When Dad returned from Europe, he met his son Bill for the first time. Bill was 8 months old when they met. Mom and Dad resettled in Randall, and I came along a few years later. Dad again taught at the high school. He never seemed to have a job because he always liked what he did. He worked late into the night or on weekends, doing what he thought needed to be done to help his students and to provide for his family. For 9 summers, he was the manager of the Loggers Jubilee in Morton. This event attracted thousands to the grandstands of this small logging town for the All-American Championships. The strongest and the most agile of the rugged loggers from the western United States and Canada came each year to compete to determine who was the best in America. Bill and I got to cheer from the grandstands, so we did get to see the results of his work on the Jubilee. But we never got to see the kind of work that Dad was doing in his high school classes. So we have to rely on what others have written, either in letters or articles. Here are some excerpts from one letter of many, written in 2000 by a student who now lives in California, but had graduated from Randall High School 44 years earlier in 1956.
Dear Mr. Hansen, you may not even remember me, but I assure you hardly a day goes by that your name does not cross my memory. I never imagined that the things you were trying to teach us would be so important or come up so frequently. I really wanted to let you know that of all the people I have known in the past 50 years, you have left the most lasting impression. You did your job well, and I, for one, am very thankful. Respectfully, Jack Forsyth, Class of 1956.
Over the years, he was invited to all of the Randall High School reunions, and Mom and Dad attended all that they could. Dad just told Bill and me what a grand time he had, but Mom would brag to us how all the students remembered Mr. Hansen, and how they told her that Dad believed in them, and that he saw promise in their abilities that even they couldn't see. He was tough, but he cared. He gave them the courage and the belief that they could live their dreams. The families worked hard, and although none were, quote, wealthy by monetary standards, each household was one of abundance. By way of an example, our Randall house had no fireplace. Bill and I were really concerned how Santa could come down our chimney. Crepe paper to the rescue as Mom and Dad made us a fireplace. This was a disaster averted. The siblings and their families got together often, especially during holidays. The cousins would spend overnights at each other's homes or at Mom and Pop's on New Wacom Hill. One disappointment was not spending much time with the Louisiana cousins. Airline tickets for such a distance were a forbidden extravagance.
Flying in those days was far different than it is today. We had propeller aircraft instead of these jets, so it was a long flight and therefore a very costly flight. Plus the planes only held about 20 or 25 people instead of 200 or 300 people. So the point you make about flying both in time and cost was far different than it is today.
Most Christmases were at Mom and Pop's. Because their house was so small, well, it didn't seem small back then, but it was small. The adults ate their Christmas dinner in the living room, and the cousins got to eat at the kitchen table. The cousins always thought they were having more fun, but lots of laughter was emanating from both rooms. We had Mother's Day at Joyce and Harold's and lots of summer picnics, both at Wilma and Chuck's and at our house. During those years, the siblings were very busy, raising children and pursuing careers. Joy was a top-notch surgical nurse. She worked at St. Francis Hospital in Monroe, Louisiana for 30 years. For many years after her retirement, the Joy Beaver Award was given to the nurse who takes the least amount of guff from the doctors. Joyce and Harold both pursued their teaching careers in Yakima. Harold taught at the college, and Joyce taught and did private counseling. Both worked in their orchard and were very involved in the county arboretum. Wilma and Chuck were entrepreneurs. They owned a children's clothing store in Chehalis and served on several boards of banks. Chuck served as a Lewis County commissioner, and Wilma served in the state legislature for several years. Mom and Dad moved to Olympia in 1957. Mom was a first-grade teacher for 29 years. Dad was the state supervisor of science and mathematics for the state superintendent of schools.
This was 1957 that I was appointed, and I think it was 1956 that the Russians launched the first space vehicle of the space age, and the little vehicle was known as Sputnik, or Sputnik as they called it. And it at least awakened America to the fact that they were far ahead of this nation in science and mathematics to have developed and designed and built a space vehicle that could rotate around the Earth for days after days at a time. And so many state departments of education across the nation created something to improve the science and math instruction in their schools, and I was appointed as the first science and math supervisor in the state of Washington.
Because Dad is such a believer in education, he took the family to California for 2 years, where he completed his doctorate from Stanford University. In 1963, the same week that Dad graduated, Bill graduated from high school. Dad had some great job offers all over the country. I personally thought Santa Barbara sounded pretty good, the beaches and all. But Dad is a real homebody. Only when he was in college or the Army did he ever live more than an hour's drive from the home where he was raised. Although he was a visiting professor at the University of California at Berkeley during the summer of 1963, he was glad to move back to Olympia, where he again worked at the state superintendent's office. His new title was State Director of Community College Administration and Finance. After 3 years in that position, this news article appeared in the August 1st, 1966 issue of the Centralia Chronicle, announcing that Dad was now a college president at Centralia College. So now his office was even closer to Mom and Pop's home, and less than 8 miles from Napavine High School, where he had graduated 30 years before. Amidst considerable controversy, Dad assisted in bringing a new community college campus to the Olympia area. What had been Olympia Vocational Technical Institute became Olympia Technical Community College. Here is Governor Dan Evans, who joined in this groundbreaking ceremony. A third campus was added a few years later, when the warden of the men's prison in Shelton signed an agreement with Centralia College to bring educational opportunities to the inmates in the prison. Dad assisted in allowing prisoners to have college programs and degrees. Once again, he saw the good in students and felt education could help them productively re-enter society. There was an era of turmoil on college campuses: Vietnam, Woodstock, the burning of the American flag. In 1976, an article in the Sunday Olympian said that the average stay for a college president in the United States was about 4 years. In 1976, this banner headline was in the Daily Olympian. It showed that Dad had been at the job for 10 years. 5 years later, in 1981, after 15 years on the job, Dad finally decided to retire. I use that word retire loosely, as you will see in a couple of minutes. A few years later, Centralia College honored Dad by naming the administration building after him. And here he was named President Emeritus of the college. Remember those passions I told you about of Dad's for both music and cars? Well, Dad was the very first person I knew to ever buy a Beatles album. And he loved collector cars. Mom wasn't so sure about these collector cars, so when Dad wanted to buy a new Thunderbird, he used me for the excuse. He said, "Carol needs to drive a car to school." So I got a black Thunderbird that was pretty neat. I thought it was pretty neat because all the boys at school wanted to see the motor under the hood. I thought I was so popular. But Dad's car collection grew, and it was a wonderful passion of his that he was able to share with both Bill and his grandsons over the years. Dad's other hobby was the buying and selling of land, and he kept the parcels of land with trees on it. He didn't buy land with big trees, but rather land that could grow big trees. He was not a forester, so he consulted with professionals as to know what to do and when to do it. He also bought little trees by the thousands. He and Bill planted close to 250,000 of them over the years, on weekends, always in the dead of winter, and he continued to plant until his early 80s. Even grandsons, Morgan and Wyatt, planted some trees. Here are Morgan, Wyatt, Ashley, and Ian, with the results of some of that planting 50 years before. Dad probably wouldn't want to be called a, quote, tree hugger, but in Bill and my minds, he is truly a great steward of the land. Dad was president and executive director of the Washington Farm Forestry Association for about 20 years, until he retired at age 84, working on both state and national regulatory issues. Here again, I use the word retired loosely. He got more awards and accolades than you can shake a stick at. Even as busy as all the siblings and their families were, one of the highest priorities continued to be family gatherings. As the cousins got older, there were fewer sleepovers, but lots of picnics and festivities. And with so many great cooks in our families, there was always fabulous food, lots of laughter, and lots of caring. But the Hanson clan also had its losses. We lost Chuck in 1994. We lost Harold in 1996. Mom and Dad had a 62-year love affair.
Suntan, wind-blown, honeymooners at last alone, feeling far above par. Oh, how lucky we are. While I give to you and you give to me true love true love. So on and on it'll always be. True love, true love, for you and I have a guardian angel on high, with nothing to do but to give to you and to give to me love forever true. For you and I have a guardian angel on high, with nothing to do but to give to you and to give to me love forever true. Love forever true.
We lost Mom in 2004. Over the years, the families have grown, with the cousins now having children and grandchildren of their own. We still make the effort to get together, such as we are doing here for this Hanson reunion. Here are a few photos of the Rossback family, the Jones family, the Beaver family, Charlie joined the extended family about 10 years ago. And here is the Hanson clan. Let's look at how those 4 kids looked 80 years ago. I'm going to guess Mom's pedal-driven sewing machine worked overtime to make those fancy clothes. And here they are 75 years later. Side by side, they make a remarkable quartet. The youngest is 87, the twins will be 89 next month, and Dad will be 90 in a couple of days. I asked Dad why he and his sisters look so happy, and here is his reply.
Well, it's because we are so proud of our kids and the partners they have chosen, and of our grandkids and the partners they have so far chosen, and the good choices they've made in the lives they live, and the friends they've chosen. And it is for that reason that the 4 of us are so proud, and our smiles show it.
The children and grandchildren look forward to the sequel to this story, when this amazing foursome are all in their roaring 90s.